So in 7.3, we talked about what a mortgage is. In some general terms, it's the type of loan whereby you secure money to purchase a home or any other real estate. And it's quite a bit more involved than regular loan, where you have a closing with attorneys involved and appraisers and the bank. And we discuss certain ratios that helps a bank determine whether you're worthy of getting a loan. So in this lesson, we're going to look at some of the costs involved with the closing, and specifically one cost would be the prepaid interest. And then we're going to create an amortization schedule, which we discussed previously. So 7.4, purchasing a home. Take a look in the book on page 420. They list off some of the costs involved with the closing, and there's this earnest money deposit, or it's often called a good faith deposit. So before anyone proceeds with all the work that goes into a mortgage, you put some money out there to ensure that you are serious about going through with this. Okay? There's attorney's fees, of course, and the origination fee. You can read that on 420. Title search, you have to have an attorney do that. Search through the court system to see if there are any liens on your title other than what you're about to have put on it with the mortgage. Also on page 420, they talk about what points are. Points are fees that you can pay at closing that'll reduce your interest rate. So for example, let's say you have a $100,000 mortgage. 1 point is 1% of the mortgage amount, so that would be $1,000. If you pay that at the closing, the bank will reduce your interest rate, and you can pay, 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, etc. And so let's say that without paying any points, you have an interest rate of 4%. Maybe if you decide to pay 1 point, you'll have an interest rate of 3.5%. So the point would be that you pay as initial money up front. However, saving 0.25% or 0.5% over the life of a 30-year loan would save you quite a bit more than that $1,000 that you paid up front. Okay, so that's a decision you have to make. Prepaid interest. So when you sit down and you have a closing on your mortgage, there's a time between when you sit and close with the attorneys at the bank and all that and do all the official paperwork and actually accept the mortgage terms and agree to it. There's a time between that day and the day that you make your first monthly payment. Now, if you remember, every monthly payment for a loan is made up of 2 components. And we're going to disregard the escrow components right now that we discussed in the last lesson. But other than escrow, there's 2 components. Each monthly payment is made up of a principal portion and an interest portion. Okay? And the principal and interest add up to the monthly payment, which is the same every month. And if you recall, your beginning monthly payments have a high amount of interest with them and a lower amount of principal. And as you make the payments and reduce the balance on the loan, the principal portion of that payment starts to increase and the interest portion decreases. And we'll do an amortization schedule later on that'll help kind of illustrate that. But when you first sign those closing documents, that interest starts to accrue each day until you make your first payment. Okay? So you have to take care of that interest that accrues before your first payment, and that's called prepaid interest. Okay? So prepaid interest. Okay, this is something that must be paid at closing. And so the only way, you're getting your mortgage, right? And if you go all the way to your first payment, without having paid that interest, you're basically getting all those days of enjoying that mortgage and home for free, right, when you really do owe it, okay, because your first payment will then start to take up the interest from there on, if that makes sense. So the way to calculate prepaid interest is to figure out what the yearly interest would be, and then divide that by 365 and get the daily interest. So the amount of interest that accrues each day. And you have to figure out then how many days there are between your closing and the first monthly payment that you agree to make, and multiply that by those number of days. And sometimes you might need a calendar to do that, right? Because I can never remember which days have 30 days or 31 days. So it's a lot easier for me, other people, to just pull up a calendar, just count days, and then multiply by that daily rate. So that's what we're going to do in example 1 over on page 421. So example 1. Okay. So if Lee and Josh are buying a $600,000 home, they have been approved for 3.75% mortgage. Now they made a 15% down payment, okay, and are closing on September 6th. So since they made a 15% down payment, see, this prepaid interest is only based on the amount of the mortgage, which should make sense, right? So they're not taking out a mortgage for $600,000. They're borrowing less than that because they're putting a down payment at the very beginning. So we need to figure out exactly how much they're borrowing, and then we can work out what the interest is on that. So if borrow. Okay. Now, 15% of 600,000. You can figure that out and then subtract it from 600,000. Right? You can do 600,000 times 0.15, get that number, and then subtract that result from 600,000. It's usually a little bit easier to take the 600,000 and multiply it by the complement of 15% to see what you're actually borrowing. Right? So if you're putting 15% down, then you're borrowing, well, 85% of the 600,000. So that makes it a little easier, whichever way you want to do it. I prefer this. So we're going to do the 600,000 they're borrowing. And if they pay 15%, then what's left is 85%. So times 0.85. When you put that in your calculator, you see they're actually borrowing, the amount of the mortgage will be for $510,000. Okay. So that's at 3.75. We need to get a daily rate. 3.75 is APR, annual percentage rate. So let's figure out what the annual interest would be. Right. So that would be the 500,000 or 510,000 times 0.0375. Okay, and that gives you 19,125. And that would be, annual if there was no compounding or anything like that. That's all we need to do for this. Okay. All right. But again, I said we need the daily interest. So if that's the annual interest, 19,125, there's 365 days in a year. So let's just divide that by 365. So our daily interest, this is what we're going to add up for each day between closing and your first payment. Daily interest. That's going to be our 19,125 divided by 365. And that should give you 52.40 per day. Okay. Now, we need to get the number of days between the closing. Okay. So if we're closing on the 6th, right? Interest will accrue from the 7th. And if the first payment is on October 1st, interest will accrue up until September 30th. Okay. So the days, let's work out the days between closing and first payment. Okay. And that's going to go from 9/7 to, well, if the first payment's October 1st, we're going to accrue this from 9/7 to 9/30, because the next day would be the 1st of October. All right? And you might need to look at a calendar there, but when you do, it works out to be 24 days. Okay? So we take this daily interest and that number of days, okay, and we can get our prepaid interest. So our prepaid interest that we'll need to take care of at closing is going to be 24 days at $52.40 each day that the interest builds up until our first payment. And you will need to pay as one of your fees at closing $1,257.60. Okay. In addition to all the other fees, that's something you need to bring to closing with you. All right, so we're going to skip example 2. I'm actually going to skip quite a few of the examples in this section here. We're going to skip example 2 and go right on to example 3. And example 3 is going to set us up to start to be able to put together an amortization schedule. Okay, if you remember, amortization schedule tells you the amount of principal and interest for every payment that you make through the life of the loan. But anyway, we need to be able to figure out what portion of the payment is principal portion and what portion is the interest portion of that before we can get to this table. So let's start with example 2, or example 3 on page 422. So as Trudy and Tom, we've been approved for $300,000 mortgage, 15 years, and APR of 3.98%. How much of the first month of payment will go to interest and principal? Well, first thing we need to do is figure out what is their monthly payment. Okay? So example 3. And I know we have a monthly payment formula, but presumably at this point you've demonstrated that you can do that algebraically. So we'll go ahead and use the TBM solver on our calculator and work out what the payment is. All right? So our N, when we plug it in there, 15 years. So the N portion is going to be 15 years times 12 payments per year. The I percent, okay, annually it's 3.98, so we type in 3.98, but we need monthly, so divided by 12, right? Our present value will be the amount of the mortgage we're taking out, right? And that'll be positive because it's going to you, and that is $300,000. And the next line will be payment, right? That's where we will arrow down to and hit our enter key. Okay, so let's go to our calculator. And there's our finance solver. Maybe I'll just show you, remind you how to get to that, right? So you can go to your scratch pad and then hit the menu button, go down to 8, finance, very first one, finance solver, okay? My other stuff in there from something else. And now I've just cleared that out. So the N, that's going to be our 15 times 12. Arrow down. Interest was 3.98 annual divided by 12 for monthly. Present value was $300,000. Let's arrow down and push enter for our payment. And that's negative, right? Because that's money going away from you. So 2216.06. So let's go back. Our payment will be 2216.06. Right? So now we need to figure out, and that payment will not change over the life of the loan. Okay, this is a fixed rate loan, not an adjustable, right? So we need to figure out the interest portion and then the principal portion of that payment. Okay? So let's get the monthly interest portion of this payment. Okay. And this is just for the first payment, right? This will be, it'll change for each payment, right? Because as you pay down your loan, the principal amount goes down, right? So it'll be different every single month. So this is just for the first payment. So, and we can just use like simple interest, right? So we can use interest equals principal, 300,000 times, now it's our APR, but we need that, you know, monthly. We got to divide it by 12. So 0.0398 divided by 12. And you can just put that in your calculator and get $995. $995. Okay? So of that payment of $22,1606 per month, this first payment has 995 of that being interest. Okay? Well, how do we figure out what portion of that is the principal? Well, if that's the interest portion, we just subtract, right? So the monthly principal, right, for just this payment, okay? Oops, not a G. I guess I was going to spell the word Pringles. Monthly principal. So that'll be our payment to 216.06 minus the interest portion here. And the rest will be the principal part of that. And that's $1,221.06. There we go. So our first payment of $22,1606. The portion of that is interest is $995. The portion of that is principal, which is $1,221.06. And so it's only this principal portion here that reduces your loan balance, okay? The interest goes straight to the bank, that $995, and then your $300,000 balance is now reduced by $1,221.06, okay? And so you could probably imagine how we'd get the next month's principal and interest portion. We're not going to be using $300,000. We'll be using whatever $300,000 is minus $1,221 as our new principal balance, okay? Which now will take us to how do we make an amortization table. The book calls it an amortization table. I usually call it amortization schedule. Feels more like a schedule to me. And that's what I've always called it, right? So an amortization schedule is defined as this. Okay? It's a listing of each month's principal and interest portions and loan balance. Listing of each month's principal and interest portions and we'll call it a running loan balance. Okay? By a running balance, it means, you know, it accounts for the changes in the balance as we go along. So it changes all the time. All right, so given example 3, we're now ready to take a look at example 4 and start to make an amortization schedule by hand. Now, if this is a, you know, if this is a 30-year loan or 15-year loan and you got all these different values for each month, to do one of these by hand is very tedious. You'd have to do it 180 times in this example. And so normally we would use something like spreadsheet software, Excel or whatnot, to simplify that for us. So we're only going to do, say, like the first 3 payments here by hand. So in example 4, and it's based on example 3, okay, using that same couple there, We pretty much already had the first month's done, okay? So what we're going to do is make a quick chart here. First row, here's the heading for that. This will be the payment number. You know, first, second, third, fourth, etc. as you get on down through the life of the loan. And then we'll have our beginning balance for each month. Remember, because that'll change as you pay down with the principal. And then we'll have the amount of our payment, which is the same all the way through, right? The payment amount will never change. Now here's what will start changing again. The interest portion of the payment and the principal portion of the payment. And of course the ending balance each month. All right, so let's make this into a little chart. Draw some lines here. That. Like this, beginning balance, that. Okay. I will do 3 months worth. And that'll be enough, hopefully, for you to get the idea, but not have to go through and do the whole thing. So payment 1, payment 2, payment 3. Okay. So for payment 1, our beginning balance is what they borrowed, okay? And that's the $300,000. And we already know from example 3 that the payment was $2216.06. So 2216.06. And then the interest, and again, we did this in example 3 here for the first one. That was our $995 in interest. Okay. And then the principal, of course, we did that in example 3, right? That was a 1221.06. Okay, well, so here comes the only new part to that. Here's what we had in example 3. So we have a beginning balance of $300,000. We made a payment. And the only part of that payment that reduces that balance is this principal portion here, the $1221.06. So we just do $300,000 minus our principal, $1221.06, and that gives us our ending balance. And when we do that on our calculator, we end up getting $298,778.94. Okay? So after that first month, we've reduced our loan balance to that amount. And I'll put the calculation over here. It was just the $300,000 minus the principal portion, $1221.06. Okay? So now we go on to payment number 2. So for payment number 2, we have a new beginning balance. And that's just as easy as bringing over the ending balance from payment 1, right? So whatever payment 1's ending balance was, the $298,778, that comes over here to our new beginning balance. So $298,778.94. Weird stuff, right? So this right here, to make this table, just gets brought over. Well, I'll do it like this. Right, ending balance gets brought over to be the beginning balance for the next one. Okay. All right, so our payment, that never changes, right? That's still $2216.06. So with a new beginning balance, we're going to have a new interest portion of that payment. So we're going to do the same thing we did in example 3, except instead of using $300,000, we will use $298,778.94. So we take our $298,778.94, multiply it by, what was the rate in there? 0.0398, right? Divided by 12. And when you do that, We have a new interest portion, 990.95. Okay? That doesn't reduce our balance at all. So we need to figure out what part of that 2216.06 payment is principal. So we take 2216.06, subtract that 990.95, and our new principal portion is 1225.11. So you notice it's a little bit more than it was last month. Right? Because if the payment stays the same and that interest portion got less, then the principal portion has to go up to keep the payment the same. All right, so now we're going to have a new ending balance. So we take our 298,778, subtract this principal, and we end up with 297,553.83. Okay, and just in case you're still confused here, we take our, that comes from our 298,778.94 minus the principal, 1225.11 minus. Okay, so that's month 2 done. And now it's just, we keep repeating the same process over and over again. And by the way, doing that mathematically, repeating the same process over and over again is what's called an algorithm. But we'll leave that for another time. So we take this ending balance. This is now the new beginning balance for our next payment calculation. Okay, so that just gets transferred over here. 297,553.83. Our monthly payment never changes, 2216.06. And now we do, just like in example 3 again, our new interest payment. So we take our 297,553, multiply by 0.0398 divided by 12. And now we have an interest portion of our payment of 986.89. See, the interest portion is going down, which means then the principal portion must go up to keep the payment the same. So we just do 2216.06 minus that 986.89, and now our principal portion is 1229.17. 2917. And now we have a new ending balance. So now we do 297,553.83 minus this principal portion of the payment, 1229.17. And we end up with 296,324.66. Right? And then we would just keep doing this, you know, all the way through. And if you wanted to do that for the full 15-year term of the loan, you were definitely going to want to use, you know, some software, a spreadsheet of some kind, unless, you know, you have not a whole lot else to do in your day. Okay, so that is the end of section 7.4 and actually the end of chapter 7.